Let me welcome all of you to this Rogers lecture report out on a great book. Let me welcome some distinguished guests here. Obviously, General Croson, one of our senior fellows. Nice to see him. General Treffry, World War II veteran, along with General Croson, by the way. How about a nice hand for, I don't know, is there anybody else that's a World War II veteran in the room?
Speak for yourself.
Well, I know I'm not. I may look it, but I'm not. Anyway, welcome to all of you. General Cheek, the director of the Army Staff, is here. Jerry, where are you, Jerry? Back there. Madam Secretary, up front. We're delighted to have you with us. Tonight, General Ann Dunwoody is going to speak with her about her book and some of her experiences. She retired, as you know, from the Army. It seems like yesterday. I'm reading 2012. It's amazing. 4 years went by fast after more than 37 years of service. And she was the Army Materiel commander, which means she controlled most of the Army's budget, or a big piece of the Army's budget, and had under her command about 70,000 civilians and military, mainly civilians, and contractors, and presence in over 50 countries, states, and 140 countries around the world, some of which I don't think she or anybody else in this room, even in their wildest dreams, thought we would be in, not the least of which was Uzbekistan, where she was one of the people who opened up that lock that went across Russia, multimodal transportation, to supply the troops who went into Afghanistan way back in 2001, as a matter of fact. She, needless to say, and I certainly don't need to stress this, but she was the nation's first 4 stars. Now, there's obviously been many since, but she led the way, and we are all enormously proud of her for the fact that she did lead the way in that important breakthrough. She has commanded at every level, and repeatedly. I first met her in the late 80s when I was the ops down at Fort Bragg. And I was being briefed on a trip to Fort Bragg, and the briefers said to me, okay, you're going to meet so-and-so, and I'd say, what's he do? And they'd tell me he's the commander of whatever. And so I kept that up, what's he do? You're going to meet Lieutenant Colonel Dunwoody. And I said, well, what's he do? And they looked at me and said, well, first of all, it's not a he, it's a she. And she commands a support battalion, right? First, and I said something about, well, that's a surprise. And they said, yeah, but you need to know that this is a real soldier doing real soldier stuff in the 82nd, and they love her. And that was readily apparent why when I showed up down there. She had complete control of everything that was going on. We had a great visit, and it was, you knew it. I knew it. and she did it. And I think all of us are very proud of you for what you have done. The book, I think, is a must-read for any officer in the U.S. Army, male or female, or anybody who wants to understand what drives women who want to be soldiers. All they want is a level playing field upon which to compete. And I believe that is what is driving these young women who are asking to serve in the combat arms and go to places like the Ranger School. All they want is a level playing field. And tonight we're going to hear from someone who conquered that. Ann, we're proud of you. How about a nice hand for Ann Dunwoody?
That's awesome. Thank you. I think we're going to turn this one off or move it out of the way. Excuse me. Well, first, it is a real treat for me to see so many friends and colleagues here tonight. And it's a real honor for me to be here to be part of the General Bernard Rogers Lecture Series. You may or may not know that my father, retired Brigadier General Harold H. Dunwoody, was a classmate of Bernie Rogers, June of 1943. And Dad, for some reason, he wasn't real fond of going back to the point, so he fought all the assignments to make him instructor. He never went back for class reunions. And the dirty little secret in our family is that Dad really wanted to go to the Naval Academy. But his dad was a West Point grad, and his grandfather was a West Point grad, and he made him go to West Point. Well, when General Rogers passed away at 87, West Point kept calling me and said, "We need to get your dad up here for a reunion." My dad had a pretty good sense of humor, and he's probably about 90 at this stage. And I said, "Dad, they really want you to come back to West Point for a reunion." And he looked at me and said, "I'm still waiting for the class to thin out a bit." It must be 5 people. Well, for someone who lives in Florida, I spend a lot of my time in this building with the Council of Trustees for AUSA and the Army National Foundation. And thanks to General Sullivan, it keeps me connected to the real Army. But I can assure you that I never dreamed or imagined that I'd be back here in this building to talk about leadership, my journey with a group of distinguished leaders like yourselves. So I thank you very much for being here tonight, and I'm honored. It's humbling to say the least, but I appreciate you taking the time. Thank you for that kind welcome, General Sullivan, and that warm reception. General Sullivan forgot to mention one thing. He forgot to mention that 5th grade was the best 3 years of my life. My sincere hope tonight is that my brief remarks and my stories told in the book will inspire people to dream big and continue to find ways to make a difference. And I know that AUSA has a legacy of finding ways to make a difference. After all, virtually everyone in this room raised their hand and took an oath, and I can't think of any greater commitment to our country than that. Now, the truth be known, I never had any intention of writing a book. But when I retired, everywhere I went, people kept asking me when I was going to tell my story. People wanted to know, why me? Why was I the first one selected to 4 stars? But the big question I always got was, how did I, as a woman, manage to fight my way to the top in this tradition-laden and rigid profession, the United States Army? And it probably would have been easier, and maybe expected by some, that I write a book on how I, like Wonder Woman, kicked and scratched my way to the top, shattering glass ceilings and breaking down doors and leaving shattered male egos in my wake. But the reality is, my journey was more about leadership than gender. And that's why I knew I had to try to tell my story. I didn't want to write a biography. I didn't want to write a memoir. I didn't want to write a diary. I wanted to write about leadership. I wanted to write about the leadership principles and strategies that worked for me, supported by stories and vignettes in my life, with the hope that I think contributed in some measure to my success, with the hopes that others could find them useful as well. Because I believe good leaders never stop learning. Now, my journey wasn't about a list of top 10 secret things to do to be a good leader. You know, if you do these 10 things, you automatically be a great leader. Matter of fact, I don't believe there are any magic recipes for leadership. If there was, everyone would buy the recipe, and voila, we'd all be great leaders. This is not a book about how to become a general. I'm not sure I could write a book like that. Matter of fact, I remember asking my husband, Craig, if he ever imagined in his wildest dreams that I would be a 4-star general. And he looked at me and said, "Baby, you've never been in my wildest dreams." We leave it to our spouses to keep us humble. Now, as you heard, I came from a family with 4 generations of West Point. And because my big brother, my dad, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather, all the way back to 1862, were all West Pointers, people naturally assumed that I had olive drab blood running through my veins and that I would join the Army to continue the family tradition. But for me, it was sports, not soldiering. That was my thing. Do you remember the song, "I Was Country Before Country Was Cool" by Barbara Mandrell? Well, I was sports before being a female athlete was cool. So when I was growing up, I loved to be outside. It was kickball, soccer, tetherball, dodgeball, you name it. And then when I went to high school and college, it was tennis and gymnastics and track. Back then, this was before Title IX, there were no scholarships for women. We just played for the love of the sport. But back then, I can assure you that I learned as much from losing as I did from winning. I learned about building a team, and I learned about building confidence. So as far back as I can remember, all I ever wanted to do was be a coach and a phys ed major. Then during my junior year in college, it was 1974, right after the end of the Vietnam War, the Army was stepping up its efforts to recruit women in the ranks. And they designed a program that if you were qualified and accepted, they would pay you $500 a month during your senior year in college. You had a 2-year commitment, and you got a commission as a second lieutenant. Well, $500 a month was a lot of money back then. I figured I could stand on my head for 2 years, so I raised my hand. I signed up, knowing it was just going to be a short 2-year detour en route to my dream job of becoming a coach. Well, after my 2-year stint was up, I remember telling my dad, you know, I really love being a soldier, and I really love leading soldiers, and I think I'm going to keep doing it as long as I love it and I can make a difference. And that's exactly what I try to do, one job at a time. So my 2 years turned into 5, turned into 10, turned into 38. But what I realized was that I really did fulfill my childhood dream. I just did it in a different profession, in a different classroom. I ended up teaching and coaching thousands of men and women on and off the battlefield in a very physically demanding profession, the United States Army. Now for my book, I chose the title, A Higher Standard, for several reasons. First, most people don't realize that less than 1% of the American population will ever serve in the military. And few realize that the men and women who do wear their uniform are held to a higher standard. First, we take an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States. That's pretty heady stuff for an 18-year-old, or anyone else for that matter. And of course, we have standards for just about everything we do. How fast you run, how many push-ups you can do, how you wear your uniform, how you wear your hair, how many times you can hit a target. And of course, we're subject to a uniform code of military justice, a code of conduct, if you will, that governs our behavior 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, in and out of uniform. But a fact that you might find surprising, and I hope you find disturbing, is that less than 30% of the American males between the ages of 18 and 25, less than 30% even qualified to come into the military, either because they're high school dropouts, they have criminal records, drug addictions, other medical problems, or obese, but 70% of these youngsters are not even eligible to come into the military. That's not an Army problem, that's America's problem. But more importantly, the reason I chose a higher standard is because when I joined the Army back in 1975, I just assumed as a woman that I was going to have to exceed the standards in order to be accepted into the ranks. And I tried to do just that. But what I realized during my journey is that all the good leaders I served with, all the good leaders I looked up to, leaders like General Sullivan, General Cody, General Wagner, General Croson, Miss Hammock, General Treffry, General Oley, General Huntoon, Pete Proctor, and so many more that are sitting in this room, they all held themselves to a higher standard and encouraged their subordinates to do the same. Now, in the Army, I always thought that people that just met the standards and those that tried to exceed the standards all the time, it was kind of like the difference between being a C student and an A student. Except in the Army, lives depend on our performance and our leadership. In the Army, we want the best athletes. We want the best soldiers on our team. A students don't ruin the curve. They enhance it. And I don't care what kind of organization you're in. If you have a team full of C students, you're probably going to have an average team. If you have a team full of A students, people that are always trying to exceed the standards, you're probably going to have a high-performing organization. Now, one of the seemingly simple leadership lessons I learned as a brand new second lieutenant was to never walk by a mistake. I was taught if you walk by a mistake, you just set a new lower standard. If you see something wrong and you don't make an on-the-spot correction, then that new lower standard becomes the new standard in the eyes of the offender. Now, in the Army, it can be something as simple as a soldier in uniform walking down the street with his hands in his pocket, to something more significant, like correcting a soldier who doesn't maintain his combat equipment to standard. Now, someone who doesn't maintain their weapon to standard in training can result in a malfunction. But someone who doesn't maintain their weapon in combat can result in a fatality. So in the Army, failing to enforce the standards leads to a slippery slope that leads to poor performance, people getting hurt, or even worse, unnecessary loss of life. But this principle doesn't only apply to the battlefield in the Army. I tell people, think about your own activities. Think about your offices. Do you have people that spend more time surfing the web, tweeting, or on Facebook than working? Well, if this behavior is tolerated, it becomes the new standard. Productivity goes down, and leaders start wondering what the heck's wrong with their organization. The same is true in the world of big business. Think about GM. If someone had identified the faulty ignition switch, instead of trying to cover it up, how many lives might have been saved? How many millions of dollars would have been saved that were spent on recalls, lawsuits, and damage control? Just think if the leaders at the Veterans Administration in Arizona had highlighted the appointment backlog problem instead of using phony metrics to cover it up to make them look good. They could have helped more veterans instead of delaying their care. What if the people at Volkswagen had actually reported the conspiracy instead of trying to cover it up? How many billions of dollars would have been saved The last count, I think, was $18.5 billion in the U.S. alone. And just Monday, the CEO from Leading Club was fired for breaking his own company rules. Now, I could go on, but you read the same headlines that I do. All of these companies had had leadership shakeups because real leadership starts at the top. Good leaders could have made a difference. Now, it might surprise you to know I never worked for a woman. I worked for men who either believed in me or didn't. During most of my career, everywhere I looked, I saw mostly white male leaders. There are a few minorities out there, but it wasn't a very diverse crowd. Now, 20 years ago, I had the opportunity to accompany then Chief of Staff of the Army, General Reimer, up to Communications Electronics Command, a very high-tech command made up of scientists, engineers, and communication experts. And I remember walking in the room, conference room, and looked around the table, and everyone sitting around the table was a white male. The only other women in the room, besides myself, were serving coffee and refreshments. And I thought, what's wrong with this picture? The year before last, my friend Sheryl Sandberg invited me out to a leadership conference that she was holding with Facebook. And she had gathered 1,500 women from all across the company to come for a leadership conference. And I'm thinking, 1,500 women in one room. And I couldn't help but think back to that little conference room back in 1995 that had 0 women to an auditorium filled with 1,500 women who are now writing software and engineering programs. And I thought, we have come a long way. But have we come far enough? Well, I don't think so. I think there's still too many people that think diversity is about adding one of these or one of those to the roster and the team. In my view, diversity isn't just about race, color, and gender. The real power of diversity comes from the power and diversity of thought. Your organization to any organization can be improved by recruiting the best and brightest from all walks of life. Team members who think differently than you do. People who bring a different perspective and are allowed to bring different ideas to the problem-solving decision-making than you do. Have you ever sat around a conference table and looked around and everyone pretty much looks kind of the same? Same political views, maybe same gender, maybe same skin color. Well, it happens. It happens in the military, it happens in Wall Street, and it happens in any organization who's not willing to invest in the diversity of thought. Now, one of my most frustrating experiences in the Army was my tenure as a 3-star general in the Pentagon. Imagine that. I was the brand new G4, and I was determined to try and fix a problem that existed when I was a major in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. A problem that senior leadership said we had to fix. No more Iron Mountains. We needed to have total asset visibility, and we needed in-transit visibility. Because after that war was over, we shipped over 20,000 containers back to the United States that were unopened because we didn't know what was in them. That's a pretty expensive way of doing business. As Lieutenant Colonel, I watched the debate, and I saw the solutions supporting ITV and total asset visibility continue to go below the funding line. So now, 13 years later, as the G4, I made it a mission that we were going to fix this once and for all. So off I took, kind of like Don Quixote, on a mission to solve the asset visibility problem for our Army. Believe it or not, the solution was within the technical capability and would cost about $53 million. That's a lot of money when you think about it. But we were trying to manage a $450 billion enterprise, and we were trying to do it on toilet paper and spreadsheets. We had real-time intel systems, we had real-time operational systems, but our logistics systems were legacy systems and stovepipe systems that didn't talk to each other. Do you think FedEx runs a package delivered that way? Do you think that Walmart doesn't know what's in every truck that they send out for delivery. All of a sudden, $53 million didn't seem like a lot of money. Well, we set off inside the Pentagon to spread the good news. We had a solution to this problem. And you know, everyone jumped on the bandwagon, right? There's this wide consensus that, yes, we need this, but it's too expensive. And everywhere we went, every level we went, we said, yes, but. And finally, we had the come to Jesus meeting with the famous three kings who make all the decisions in the budget arena in the building. All three-star generals, friends of mine, and I knew they were going to appreciate the merits of our asset visibility solution. So I briefed them. They listened, they nodded their head, and summarily dismissed because it was too expensive. These are not bad people. They had other priorities, and those guys had a managed shortage. And once again, this did not make the funding line cut. They needed more tanks, they needed more helicopters, they needed more everything. And part of that was because we couldn't see everything. We didn't know what we had, and we didn't know where it was. It was kind of like being in a meeting with Charlie Brown's teacher where everyone's just going blah, 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 blah. They had their priorities in order, and we were at the bottom. Well, at the end of the day, General Schoonmaker and General Cody came to the rescue and directed the Army staff to fund PBOOSH. I know you never liked the name, but that was the asset visibility tool that has now given us real-time asset visibility of our equipment and our readiness. And we did the surge in Afghanistan as we were doing our drawdown out of Iraq. 50% of the equipment that supported that surge came out of Iraq because we could see it, we knew what we needed, we could fix what we needed, and instead of buying new or shipping from the States, we were able to send it from Iraq to Afghanistan. And I'm not sure we could have met that timeline without having that system in place. Now, I was blessed throughout my career to be asked and selected by leaders to join their teams. Often the first female, but certainly not the last. And as you all know, you don't just skip along the yellow brick road in the land of Oz and wake up one morning as a 4-star general. I had roadblocks, I had obstacles, but I had a lot of people that were willing to help. And I believe those roadblocks, those obstacles, and the people willing to help exist in every organization and in every business environment. Now, not everyone was happy to see Ann Dunwoody when I reported into my new unit. Sometimes it was the same old, what on earth are we going to do with this woman? And when I first got to the 82nd, 1988, I had a master's degree in logistics. I had just graduated from Command General Staff College. I was a senior parachutist. I had 2 successful company command under my belt, and I was fired up. I was going to the All-American Division. Then I found out that I was going to be the first and only female field grade in the division, and that most of the senior leadership was plotting to trade me off to another unit so they could preserve the boys' club. When the plotting didn't work, and they told Dunwoody staying, they didn't know what to do with me. In their minds, they couldn't possibly give a woman with a meaningful job, a career-enhancing job, so they gave me a menial job, one no one wanted. I became the division property book officer, replacing a major who was non-selected lieutenant colonel. The good jobs, like the S3, Battalion XO, and my dream job, the division parachute officer, went to white males with lesser qualifications than I had. This was the only time in my military career that I thought seriously about leaving the Army. But I truly believed that by staying on the moral high ground, by not lowering my standards, resorting to counterproductive tactics like name-calling or innuendos or gossip, that I would make believers out of non-believers. And it worked for me. I ended up serving 6 consecutive years in the 82nd. I didn't stay in that menial job very long. I got moved over to the NISCOM S3 operations shop, later took over an XO battalion, finally got my dream job as a division parachute officer, and ended up being the first female to command in that storied division. I loved every minute of it. Was it a rough road? You betcha. But the lesson I like to share is to tell folks, kids, believe in themselves. Never give up and try to be the best they can be, and never let others dissuade you from doing something that you're passionate about. Just think about it for a minute. If you're male or female, if we let others unduly influence or make decisions for us, they win. If we let others drive us away from our passions or something we believe in, they win. Were there times when it'd be easy to quit and run in the face of adversity? You bet. Were there times when I was afraid, angry, or frustrated? You bet. But at the end of the day, I'd ask myself the question, if I quit, if I take the easy road, if I don't try to make a difference, who's the real winner and who's the real loser? And for me, the seemingly unsurmountable challenges turned into opportunities because it was all about leadership. Now, there's a myth I'd like to dispel, and some of you know this well. Having 4 stars on your shoulders doesn't mean that everyone automatically does everything you ask, when you want, how you want it, and where you want it. The stars help, but they have to believe in what you want them to do. And that's true no matter what the task. In my last assignment as the commander of Army Materiel Command, I remember thinking, if all 69,000 people came to work every day, clearly understanding how important he or she was to the accomplishment of a mission, how powerful that would be. So one of the most powerful leadership tools I learned was visioning. This wasn't something I dreamed up on my own. When I got promoted and took over AMC, General Gordon Sullivan called me and I met him for breakfast. And we started talking about strategic visioning. And he said, Ann, you need to fashion a vision on one page where the entire organization can see themselves. And I thought, one page? How are you going to do that? Well, he pulled out a napkin and he started drawing. And he showed me how he had created a one-page vision when he was the chief of staff, trying to manage the drawdown and manage readiness. Well, creating a strategic vision for an organization sounds easy, but it's really hard. But I took that napkin back to my staff. People like Ron Alberto, I see him back there, helped us shape the vision for Army Materiel Command, now affectionately known as the Yellow Brick Road, our road to Huntsville. If you're successful with a vision, every individual and every subordinate organization can see how they fit into the grand scheme. If you're successful, people will be excited about the future. If you're successful, they will know that what they do every day is important to you and to the organization. And if you're successful, they will know that no matter what they're responsible for, no matter what level they are in the organization, that they can make a difference in the success of the company's goals. We use this vision as we try to support and move our headquarters from Fort Belvoir down to Huntsville. Initially, we only had about a 20% response of folks that wanted to move. So imagine losing 80% of your talented workforce. They're mostly civilians. They lived in Virginia all their lives. Their parents lived there. Their grandparents lived there. When we started the vision campaign, we got the Chamber of Commerce. We started talking to people about this new state-of-the-art headquarters and this transformation of AMC to be a global logistics command. And people got excited. And we ended up having 80% of our headquarters move. And they moved because they didn't want to be left behind. They were excited about the future, and they wanted to be part of it. Now, there are other leadership lessons in my book, but the thought I want to leave you with tonight is that people like yourselves really do want to make a difference. And the good leaders I know want to inspire people. So they don't want to just settle for getting by, but they want to exceed the standards. They want to encourage them to excel, to be A students, to live and lead by higher standards. So no matter what you lead, a major company, a team, a church group, or even the Association of the United States Army, being a good leader makes all the difference. Good leaders don't walk by a mistake, they deal with it. Good leaders treat others with dignity and respect, and they embrace diversity of thought. Good leaders tackle challenges, they don't run away trying to avoid them. And good leaders try to make a difference and try to live and lead by a higher standard. I truly enjoyed being with you all tonight. Thank you for being here and for the opportunity to share my thoughts in my books with you. Please keep our deployed men and women in your thoughts and prayers. Pray for their success and safe return. God bless you. God bless America. Go Army, beat everybody.